So the question, what I'm going to ask in this talk is, what role can we as humanities and social sciences, academics, students, researchers, play in such a world? And what I will argue is that the key contribution of the humanities and social sciences today resides in the fact that contemporary challenges such as what you see here on the slide resist simplistic solutions. Instead, what I will argue is that in order to address our current problems and challenges, we need to take social and cultural complexity seriously. And to navigate this complexity, our research needs to be actively and critically engaged with those problems by providing contextual knowledge and understanding about them. And I will explicate some of the requirements for this kind of research at the end of this presentation. And I myself am a media and cultural studies scholar, as you've already been told. In my view, the approaches within media and cultural studies are very pertinent to the kind of engaged research that I would like to promote. In contemporary society, knowledge is central. Oh, by the way, next slide, please. In contemporary society, knowledge is central in the decision-making process of government and industry. Knowledge has played an especially important role in the process of modernization. The development of modernity was highly dependent on the evolution of scientific knowledge, which has had a far-reaching impact on the technical processes, economic systems, and organizational structures that make modern societies work. Science and modernity have become inseparable, and modern scientific values, such as those of disinterested inquiry and objective truth, have gradually become pervasive drivers of the quest for knowledge and problem solving in modern societies. So while in traditional societies there was great hostility towards scientific values and methods, in modernity there is a strong belief in the answers that science is able to provide and the sense of certainty it is assumed to afford. For example, science has been fundamental to what we generally recognize as progress, especially technological progress. It is the discoveries made by scientists that have produced all the modern inventions which the world has now come to take for granted, whether it is the steam engine or the airplane or the mobile phone. In short, science has become pervasive to the generation of wealth and well-being in today's world. The impact of science is also pervasive in the way societies are governed. For example, modernity has nurtured an enormous belief in planning as a way of governing society. And planning is a practice based on the predictabilities generated by scientific knowledge. The practice of planning streamlines the complex processes of managing society through things like setting some goals and deciding in advance what should be done, how, when, and by whom. Planning is the application of bureaucratic rationality as a way of getting control and power over the future. and it is predicated on the assumption that the future is essentially knowable, yeah? So that we can know the future, and therefore that we can control it. So knowledge and control are often assumed to be strongly related to each other. Now, this knowledge of the future is generally provided by science. That is, the principles of bureaucratic rationality are matched by the assumptions of scientific rationality. And in this way, modern society and modern science can be said to have evolved together. However, the success of science has also made the world a vastly more complicated place. Since the Industrial Revolution began in England more than 2 centuries ago, the discoveries which have been generated by scientific progress have made the world more developed in terms of industrialization of production, transport systems, communication structures, and so on. But they also have produced wide-ranging social effects, and many of these social effects are often unintended and unanticipated, right? And they have created new problems that require the search for new solutions. And to just give a very simple example, the introduction of the motor car, or perhaps even the motorbike, in cities such as Jakarta or Yogyakarta, was certainly a form of progress in that it made travel so much more convenient, but it has also resulted in very congested cities, and it has heightened air pollution. So here we have a kind of an entanglement of the introduction of what can be seen as progress, kind of a new technological invention, a car or a motorbike, but it has created major problems. In other words, the modernization of societies has typically been driven by the adoption of new technologies which were invented by science, but the consequences were not singularly good. Instead, the impacts are complex and contradictory, having multiple economic, social, cultural, and environmental effects. We can see this being the case very strongly in the process of globalization that has transformed the world in the past few decades. Progress in science and technology has underpinned the process of globalization, which would not have been possible without the invention of instantaneous communication systems such as the internet. But as we all know, globalization has also unsettled people's livelihoods in many different parts of the world and unleashed massive economic and social change at local, national, and global levels. In this process of change, many older ways of life have come under threat, replaced by newer lifestyles based on mass production and consumption, the global circulation of goods and images via media, obviously, intensifying urbanization, and so on. And in all these developments, science and technology are not just benign sources of improvement for society, but instead, by constantly creating new knowledge, they can also cause fresh uncertainty and instability, generating new problems not foreseen by science itself. So we now live then in a world where science and technology are indispensable, but also where we are faced with huge complex challenges whose scale is unprecedented and for which science and technology provide no adequate means of resolving. So, as a result, many problems and challenges that we have in societies are intractable, and people feel that it's very difficult to resolve them. So let me just mention one such challenge, which is climate change. Climate change is perhaps the most important example of an intractable global problem for which there are no national boundaries. It is interesting that in the case of climate change, the main role of scientists has not been that of providing solutions, but of conveying the message to the world that global warming is real and that something needs to be done about it. Yeah, so this was the role, for example, of the reports of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which have since in the last few decades produced reports about the state of the world's climate. And thousands of scientists from all over the world have contributed to these reports. And they have raised a sense of urgency to the problem of global warming. And some of these reports, as you probably are aware, have been quite controversial. There are quite a few vested and powerful interests who are not happy with the message that the world is warming at rapid rate and that something needs to be done about it. So these reports became very contested. And as a result, scientists can be seen as being almost powerless when it comes to finding ways of solving the problem of climate change. Right? So they can provide the message, but not the solution. The development of more and better science and more advanced technologies does not seem to be the answer. Indeed, the very problem of climate change has in large part been a product of the modern industrial modes of production and consumption, which have been fostered by science and technology in the first place. First in the Western world, but increasingly also in the developing world, including countries such as Indonesia, for example. Yet it is very difficult to imagine that humanity will turn back the clock of modernity. As a modern lifestyle, modernity is here to stay. We can't go back to a traditional world of the past. And in the developed world, most people will refuse to give up their comfortable modern lifestyles, such as air conditioning. While in the developing world, most people aspire to those same modern comforts, and understandably so. So the problem of climate change is far more than just a technical problem, right, or a scientific issue. For example, related to the need to reduce carbon emissions. Instead, we should see the problem of climate change as a complex challenge and consisting of a complex amalgam and interconnected network of political, social, and cultural problems. So while science used to be seen as the source of certainty, predictability, and control over nature and society, this modernist belief in science can no longer be uncritically upheld today, shaken as it is by the escalating complexity of the world's problems for which scientific solutions are not available, as the example of climate change shows. Instead, what has emerged in the past few decades is a fundamental increase in uncertainty, both in science and in society. It is clear that scientific knowledge cannot help us in controlling the future, because the future is inherently uncertain. Planning still exists as a governmental practice to manage society, but the bureaucratic tools of planning are increasingly complex themselves and increasingly ineffective, as they are incapable of capturing unexpected contingencies and the unpredictable volatility of ever-changing contexts and influences. In general, then, there is a growing sense of uncertainty about where human society is heading, for what kind of future we should prepare ourselves, and how. Yeah, so we are really in the age of uncertainty. All this has important implications for the production of knowledge today. There is now a much greater recognition of the limits of the predictive power of scientific knowledge, and this is reflected in the popularity, for example, of chaos theory since the late 20th century, or more generally what is called complexity theory. Yeah? And complexity theory consists of a range of theories which stress non-linearity, unpredictability, and self-organization in the way systems work. In describing the world as intrinsically complex, to the extent that it is constantly changing, unstable, and a dynamic system, and where there is no consistent relationship between different elements in the systems, we have to understand this complexity as intrinsic to the world we live in today. Yeah? And when we think of the world of society as a system and as an unstable system, what we can say is that interactions between parts of that system may produce unpredictable effects, which, however small, may lead to massive changes in the future. There is no simple and linear relationship between cause and effect, and instead, as a complex system, the world works in a non-linear fashion, which with countless multiple agents acting in parallel, so many different activities going on everywhere without coordination often, and even if there is coordination, no clear sense of the success of that coordination, and impacting on one another in random and indirect ways. Next one. Now, complexity theory presents a fundamentally anti-positivist philosophy of knowledge, and it has become an increasingly influential way of looking at the world. Right? And most of you might have heard of the so-called butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect is the idea that the flap of the wings of a butterfly in Brazil may, much later perhaps, set off a tornado in Texas. That's the example. Or there is also another popular phrase coming from complexity theory, which is living at the edge of chaos, which refers to the way in which systems always operate at the precarious boundary between order and disorder. Yeah? So the sense that order itself is very much a fragile achievement, can always be disrupted by forces, disorderly forces. These are ideas derived from complexity theory, and they resonate strongly in the social experience of complexity and uncertainty today. So the question now is, how can we respond effectively to this condition of complexity and uncertainty? What kind of knowledge would be best suited to tackle the complex problems and challenges we are faced with? So it is here where I think that the role of the humanities and social sciences is particularly important. The humanities and social sciences have generally lived in the shadow of the natural sciences and tend to be neglected in the national science and research policies of governments. Right? And governments today, whether it is in the West, in Europe and the United States and in Australia, or in the countries of Asia, still tend to look to the so-called STEM disciplines as the source of useful rationalist knowledge. Yeah? STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the STEM disciplines are very much prioritized when governments talk about science and research policy. And these STEM disciplines are, as we seen earlier about the role of science more generally, they are seen as the source of useful rationalist knowledge, often narrowly focused on the goals of economic growth and technological innovation. Science is still expected today to provide a better understanding and more precise predictions of the challenges society faces and to come up with the solutions. But these solutions are often imagined in limited technocratic ways. This is despite the fact that the challenges faced are generally very complex and multidimensional, as I said earlier, and strongly embedded within social structures and cultural parameters. So, when you look at the Indonesian strategy for science and technology development, for example, what is being prioritized are the following research themes: climate change, global warming, deforestation, energy and environmental issues, and natural disaster mitigation. So these are the research themes that the Ministry for Science has put forward. This is a highly restricted list of themes, which are undeniably important for the Indonesian economy, but they are focused strongly on technical and engineering solutions. However, in a recent report, I have also looked at what has been happening in Asia more broadly, and what we see is that in the summary of the long-term challenges facing the countries of Asia, a broad range of concerns for Indonesia have been identified. And some of these are managing mobility and urbanization, infrastructure, and I've heard a lot about that since being here, environmental degradation, reducing dependence on technology transfer from developed countries, sustainable and inclusive growth, food and water security, raising the quality of human resources, managing energy needs, and transport infrastructure. So this is a list that has been kind of compiled from the different official documents. This list of challenges encompasses a wider ranging assemblage of issues, and all of them have distinct social and cultural dimensions, which can only be satisfactorily confronted with knowledge and understanding from the humanities and social sciences. However, in Indonesia, as elsewhere in Asia, there is still insufficient recognition for the contribution of the humanities and social sciences, although this may be slowly changing. Yeah? The next, please. A recent UNESCO report confirms this by tracking trends in research productivity by discipline area in Asia, and they use Scopus publication data for this. So they count the number of publications in journals in particular fields. Right? And what they have found is that over the 15-year period from 1997 to 2012, engineering has been the most important discipline focus in Asia, accounting for 17% of all publications, followed by medicine, 11%, physics and astronomy, 10%, and material sciences, 9%. And as you can see from this slide, the social sciences accounted for only 4% of publications, with only a minuscule 0.2% of the region's publication output in the arts and humanities. And these were data from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. Now, of course, such statistics need to be considered with caution. The Scopus database, like all databases, can never be a comprehensive compilation of all publications. Right? In particular, it is highly likely that it will miss out on a lot of local journals which are published in local languages, or in languages other than English, for example. And I assume that this will especially affect the disciplines of the humanities, which tend to be published in local languages. Nevertheless, I think the overall trend is obvious. The humanities and social sciences account for only a small minority of scientific publication output across Asia. However, the UNESCO data also provides a longitudinal picture, next slide, which shows a more encouraging development, I think. The data indicate that over the same 15-year period, the arts and humanities have seen the greatest growth. So there is relatively the greatest increase of publications in the arts and humanities, a growth rate of 19%. And this growth, according to the data, was especially rapid from 2008 onwards, so in the last 8 years or so, when publications in the arts and humanities grew fourfold. And the social sciences also grew more strongly than all the STEM disciplines, except computer science, right? And computer science grew very fast, but the social sciences relatively fast as well, 16%. So while this growth in the arts, humanities, and social sciences is from a low base, it does suggest that as Asian countries become more developed, research and scholarship in the humanities, arts, and social sciences is growing in importance. And this, of course, bodes well for our effort, assuming that we are here in a group of people kind of committed to the humanities and social sciences. It bodes well for our effort to contribute knowledge that can address the complex challenges of our time in a more holistic way, not just in terms of science and technology, but also in terms of society and culture. However, the question needs to be asked, what kind of humanities and social science research do we need to foster? How can our research best respond to the conditions of complexity and uncertainty as I have discussed so far? The humanities and social sciences have often been dismissed as producing only value-laden, contextual, and therefore unreliable knowledge, lacking objectivity and universal applicability. And of course, the humanities and social sciences comprise a very diverse and sometimes conflicting range of theories, methods, and approaches. Some disciplines in the social sciences, such as economics, political science, and some versions of sociology, have more than others embraced methodologies which stress value-neutral objectivity, modeled after the example of the physical sciences, and using overwhelmingly quantitative analytical techniques to establish their epistemic authority. Not so surprisingly, governments tend to prefer quantitative knowledge, understood as factual knowledge. When they do deploy social science knowledge for policy and planning purposes, for example, they like to use survey data, which are compiled quantitatively. However, although statistical and other objectivist knowledge does have its uses, and I have obviously used some myself when I referred to the UNESCO data earlier, they tend to create an exaggerated illusion of certainty and absolute truth, which flies in the face of the condition of uncertainty and complexity I have referred to earlier. Indeed, it can be argued that in the current time of mounting global uncertainty and complexity, attention to context and to values is precisely what we need in our knowledge production practices. Next slide. As the distinguished social theorist Immanuel Wallerstein points out, we live with the knowledge that uncertainty, at least long-term uncertainty, seems to be the only intractable reality. But if this is so, then we need to break down the illusion of certainty and the quest for absolute truth, and accept the fact that our knowledge production practices can never wipe out this overall uncertainty. In our exceedingly complex and inherently uncertain world, it is not helpful, in my view, to define the role of knowledge as the creation of, and I'm quoting here from Helga Novotny, what she calls controllable islands in the sea of uncertainty. Yeah? So it seems like this is what kind of more positive notions of knowledge production aim to create. Instead, we should have more modest aims. I would suggest that as we conduct our research, all we can do as humanities and social science researchers is to expand our contextual understandings of the world, which will always be partial and incomplete. At the same time, however, I would suggest that such contextual understandings can play a powerful role in assisting us in making more informed choices in response to the concrete problems in front of us. Making choices, of course, is very much a way of navigating complexity, involving taking responsibility, and this always involves values. In Wallerstein's words, if reality is uncertain, there is no way to avoid choices. If we cannot avoid choices, there is no way to prevent the value commitments, preferences, and presuppositions of the analyst from entering the process of analysis. Yeah, so doing research always involves taking a stance in that way. In short, in foregrounding the importance of values and context in knowledge production, I am arguing here for research in the humanities and social sciences that seeks to contribute to people's efforts to navigate the morass of complexity we find ourselves in ways that are sensitive to the ways in which complex global challenges are experienced, made sense of, and responded to on the ground. And such experiences and responses are always context-specific and informed by particular values and involving power relations, interests, and so forth. This philosophy of research starts with the recognition that all knowledge has profound consequences for how we live in relations to other people and to nature. As researchers, we will therefore have to be actively and reflexively aware of the consequences of our knowledge production practices. This awareness informs what I would like to call the spirit of engaged research. And this term engaged research is a particular approach to doing research that I and my colleagues at the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University have tried to develop. And I should stress that engaged research is more an orientation to knowledge than a fixed set of descriptions. Right? It is an orientation based on the recognition that we need to work together to help formulate the informed choices we need to make in navigating the massive complexities, of the 21st century, without recourse to the stance of scientific certainty. Yeah? And here again I can refer to cultural studies that has given the impetus for thinking this way about engaged research. So, what are the requirements of engaged research in the face of the global challenges we face? First of all, and it is number one, that's fine, it is important in engaged research that we frame our global challenges firmly as social and cultural challenges, not just as technical and physical challenges. This is not as easy as it sounds, given the current dominance of techno-scientific ways of thinking, which have provided a particular lens through which to understand problems. But as the example of climate change shows, and more broadly, the challenge of global environmental crisis, social and cultural practices are profoundly implicated in the deterioration of natural environments. Both the causes and consequences of our environmental problems have a fundamental human dimension and are fundamentally social in nature. They involve the ways in which our societies are organized and their economic imperatives. They impact on people's lifestyles and aspirations, and the ways in which they pursue their dreams. Formulating responses to these problems therefore requires taking into account the meanings and values people attach to their lives, the ways in which they make their living, and the problems they face in their kind of everyday context, as they intersect with the physical and biological factors that impinge on people's living environments. Engaged research, in short, recognizes the inextricable interconnectedness of nature and culture, and of society, politics, and economics. Secondly, engaged research really needs to take the complexity of global challenges seriously. What this means is that we should avoid reductionist thinking, which may lead to the misguided evocation of simplistic solutions to complex problems. So that means that we have to argue against reductionism and simplistic thinking. Right? So I can refer here to a distinction made by Gadjah Mada, who describes two types of problems. Right? Problems can be difficulties, or they can be messes, M-E-S, from mess, yeah, a mess. Difficulties are bounded problems about which there is a broad agreement about the nature of the problem and some accepted understanding of its possible solution. For example, when a car breaks down, the problem can be easily solved by finding the faulty part and replacing it so you can repair the car. Messy problems, on the other hand, are unbounded problems in terms of the time and resources they could absorb, the scope of inquiry needed to understand them, and the number and range of people that may need to be involved in trying to find a way of addressing the problem, right? So messy problems are inherently complex because to begin with, it's quite difficult sometimes to come to an agreement to the definition of the problem in the first place, right? So there are many perspectives on the issue, on the situation that can be brought to bear on a particular issue, and they are related to many divergent interests associated with attempts to solve the problem. Often the boundaries of the problem cannot be clearly circumscribed because it is entangled with a host of other issues. Climate change is perhaps, again, one of the most dramatic examples of such a complex, messy problem. No single discipline or scientific field is able to fully understand, let alone address, complex challenges such as this. Therefore, engaged research will need to be interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary, ideally involving researchers from various and complementary perspectives and enterprise. So in that sense, often engaged research needs to take collaboration with others, other types of researchers, seriously. Next one. The third important requirement for engaged research is that it recognizes both global processes and local particularities. And this is a crucial point. We need to look at issues and problems from the perspective of multiple scales. To understand the complexity of what is going on in a particular locality, it is not enough to conduct a purely local ethnography, nor is it sufficient to focus only on the broad global dimension. So, for example, although climate change is a global problem, the way it manifests itself around the world can be very different, right? So different types of things are taking place as a result of climate change. So it can be experienced in a very different way in a country such as Indonesia compared to maybe Europe or Australia or South America. Therefore, the way adequate adaptations to it are to be found, to be very context dependent, and they are subject to local conditions and to the resources and capacities people on the ground possess to rise to the challenge of imagining, organizing, and implementing responses that are suitable to the situation they find themselves in. At the same time, local particularities are always complexly intertwined with global processes. They should therefore not be considered in isolation. In this regard, an important point, I think, needs to be made about the role of the nation state. Too often, research tends to be conducted within a frame of what has been called methodological nationalism, in which the nation state is assumed to be the natural place within which local issues and specificities are contained. And however, in today's globalized world, social and cultural processes not only take place above but also below the level of the nation state. And they are also intimately interconnected across boundaries. Therefore, our research should be going beyond what can be called the container theory of the nation state, right? And in the container theory of the nation state, the assumption is that what is happening in Indonesia can be understood by just looking within Indonesia, for example. On the contrary, although there are always national specificities, we cannot understand them fully if we simply stay within the nation. So what we could say is that what is happening in Indonesia is not also necessarily to be understood as of Indonesia. Now, of course, the global challenges I have referred to here, such as climate change, make it very clear that the national frame is an insufficient platform for understanding and action. In practical terms, we can overcome methodological nationalism by engaging in collaborative research, for example, where both local and global issues can be jointly examined in a more comparative perspective. I think that is a very useful way of looking at your own context in the context of other contexts. It is also the interconnectedness of local and global processes that we need to understand and untangle. Finally, a few words need to be said about how we should conceive of solutions in engaged research. Because we're talking about problem solving. Now, what are the solutions in this that we can imagine here? Engaged research, as I see it, aims to contribute to making informed choices on how to act in a complex and uncertain world, but it is obvious that there cannot be any definitive one-size-fits-all solutions. Complex problems can only be addressed partially in context-dependent and culturally responsive ways. Moreover, efforts to solve one problem may have unforeseen or unintended consequences and create new problems down the track. In turn, needing concerted efforts to resolve them, and so forth and so on. So this means that we need to adopt a more process-oriented approach to problem solving, which is not based on predetermined linear goals and formulas, but on long-term engagement with evolving realities and an ongoing effort to generate contextual knowledge that can help us in plotting a course through the complex challenges we face. In this regard, engaged research is fundamentally future-oriented, even as it recognizes the constitutive importance of the past. Precisely because the future is uncertain and fundamentally unpredictable, it is our responsibility, I think, to contribute what we can by proposing constructive paths towards that uncertain future without knowing what it is going to be, and by developing practical ways of navigating the complexities along the way. Thank you. So that looks very much like that.
Is that Bundaran Hi in Jakarta?
Yes.
Oh,
And the
wow.
cars, you see.
It looks pretty.
It looks pretty, but actually this is the traffic jam.
Yeah, really out of traffic jam. Nice one. Did you take a picture yourself?
No.
Oh, oke, terima kasih Ibu Ien Ang. Dan sebelum kita buka, izinkan Susi